Very much, Usman, and everyone who's been involved in the call for protection. Usman and everyone at Protect Palestine, Jill Stein and Marco Bruno at the Green Party USA and Lifeline for Palestine, Eric Rubin and everyone at People Against Genocide Everywhere, Richard Falk and my colleagues at the Gaza People's Tribunal, journalist Sam Husseini, who's been demanding these kind of action for years now, and PNGO, PINGO, the network of Palestinian movements and civil society groups who are on the front lines, who have made this call and whose agency as voices of the Palestinian people we are all bound to center and to respect. And so many others have been beating the drum of protection for the Palestinian people from apartheid and genocide and for their liberation from the Israeli regime. And thanks to all of these terrific panelists today as well. So let me begin with a fundamental truism. The Israeli regime will not end the genocide in Palestine of its own will. The regime, the majority of its people, its proxies and lobbies and sponsors in the West are fully committed to the genocide and to the destruction and erasure of every remnant of Palestine from the river to the sea. And Western governments like the US, UK, Germany, and others, and too many other complicit states in the region are fully dedicated to the cause of Israeli impunity. That means that genocide and apartheid will only end through resistance against the Israeli regime, the steadfastness of the Palestinian people, the solidarity of the rest of the world, and the isolation, weakening, defeat, and dismantling of the Israeli regime, as it was in apartheid South Africa. This is a long-term struggle. But what can we do now? There are things we can do right here and right now. Things, of course, like boycott and divest and sanctions and demonstrations and disruption and civil disobedience, education, prosecutions under universal jurisdiction, civil cases against Israeli perpetrators and complicit actors in our own societies. And yes, we can also demand intervention and protection for the Palestinian people. Now, don't be fooled. There are many proposals for intervention, but some of these are not about protection of the Palestinian people, let alone their liberation. Some have called for weak, toothless civilian monitors for Gaza, but there have been human rights monitors in Gaza for decades, before and throughout the current genocide. Others have called for a so-called stabilization force, not to protect the Palestinians from the Israeli regime, but rather to keep an eye on the Palestinian resistance, to restore the cruel status quo ante that existed before October of 2023, with the caging of the Palestinian people and their slow, systematic annihilation. The normalization of the status of the Israeli regime and the resuscitation of Oslo by creating a new smokescreen with a kind of Oslo 2.0, a two-state solution where somewhere down the road, where Palestinians are told they have to negotiate for their rights with their oppressor, as their rights and land are continuously eroded and the regime's status is solidified and normalized. And then there's Donald Trump floating the idea of a US occupation and colonial domination of Gaza, revealing once again just how deluded and demented an emperor he really is. Finally, even the Israeli regime itself has suggested the deploying of a proxy occupation force manned by forces from Arab states that collaborate with the Israeli regime, another dark fantasy of the genocidal regime. Let me talk about the UN options. That brings us to the United Nations, and the UN, I have to say, has much to answer for in this genocide. Some in the UN have been absolutely heroic, like the UNRWA workers, who have been murdered in their hundreds by the Israeli genocide, many along with their families. The other humanitarians have continued to work to relieve the suffering of the people of Gaza in the face of enormous risk. The International Court of Justice, which has issued historic decisions affirming the rights of the Palestinian people in the face of enormous pressures not to do so. The special rapporteurs like Francesca Albanese, who have endured 2 years of smears and slander and harassment and death threats and US sanctions. And the political side of the UN is another issue, though, because some, like the Secretary General, his senior advisors, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the senior political leadership, they have failed miserably, not because they could not do more, but because they chose not to do so. And of course, the enduring symbol of UN failure is the Security Council. There are Security Council scenarios. Let's look at them quickly. As everyone knows, the Security Council has the power to deploy an armed force, and it has the power to impose that force even against the will of a country under Chapter 7. But given that the US, the UK, and France, all complicit states, have veto power in the Council, there are only two possible outcomes from the Security Council. One, a mandate that pleases the United States as Israel's proxy, and therefore the terms of which would be framed in a way that is disastrous for the Palestinians, or a veto of any force that would actually be helpful. So we know that the UN Security Council is deadlocked by the US veto, but here's the point. The world does not have to surrender in the face of that veto. The United Nations General Assembly that will meet in September is empowered under the Uniting for Peace resolution to act when the Security Council is unable to act owing to the veto. And taking such extraordinary action has never been more urgent. A UN General Assembly resolution adopted under Uniting for Peace could call on states to adopt comprehensive sanctions and a military embargo against the Israeli regime. It could withdraw the UN General Assembly credentials of Israel. It could mandate an accountability mechanism like a criminal tribunal to address Israeli war crimes, crimes against humanity, apartheid, and genocide. It could reactivate the UN's long-dormant anti-apartheid mechanisms to address Israeli apartheid. And, for purposes of this conversation, most importantly, it could mandate an armed, multinational UN protection force to deploy to Gaza at the request of the State of Palestine to protect civilians, open entry points via land and sea, facilitate humanitarian aid, preserve evidence of Israeli crimes, and assist in reconstruction. All of these actions could be adopted by the UN General Assembly with a two-thirds majority. And since Palestine has requested an intervention, no Chapter 7 action by the Security Council is needed to deploy a protection force. Very importantly, as affirmed by the recent World Court findings, Israel would have no legal right to refuse them. The court has affirmed that Israel has no authority, no sovereignty, and no rights in Gaza or in the West Bank. The process is very simple. A proposal is vetoed in the Security Council. That's inevitable. Secondly, states call for an emergency special session in the General Assembly under Uniting for Peace. Also easy, as Emergency Special Session 10 is in a session that can be resumed with a simple request. Third, a resolution is proposed by one or more sponsors in close consultation with the State of Palestine. This is also entirely possible unless the representative of Palestine somehow relents, and politically doable. Fourth, the resolution is adopted with two-thirds majority. This too is possible based on previous votes in the General Assembly. Fifth, the Secretary General is instructed to solicit troop contributions from countries. This is standard practice, and here's where pressure for states from across the globe to donate troops becomes very important. Finally, the mission is assembled and deployed. That's technically very easy. It is politically very challenging. But legally, there are no hurdles. The rules allow this, and there are precedents for it, like the 1956 UN emergency force that was deployed by the General Assembly to the Sinai. And judging by previous voting, a two-thirds majority is possible. Not guaranteed, but very possible. Now, you can be sure that the United States and the Israeli regime will do all in their power to obstruct the UNGA process and the deploying of the mission. But they don't have a veto. And that's the difference. This takes only political will and a political mobilization. It requires a step-by-step strategy. First, present the resolution and force states under the glare of public exposure to vote for or against a force to protect the Palestinians from genocide. That means states that have been hiding behind the US veto, saying, well, we tried, but they vetoed it, unfortunately, knowing that the Security Council is not going to act. They will be exposed, and they will have to either say we support protection for Palestine or we do not. Then you deploy the force by air, land, sea. You use all diplomatic avenues to ensure that it can be deployed to press the regime and its Western backers to stand down. And if they are blocked, the force could pre-deploy, for example, to Sinai and carry out remote monitoring while the pressure continues. So in other words, the world has not done all it can do to stop this genocide, and it has to try. Now, we're not naive. Success is not assured, but failure is guaranteed if we don't try. And time is of the essence. Genocide is raging in Palestine, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank. Famine has been declared this week in Gaza. Israel is expanding its military presence and appears to be poised to provoke a wider war with Iran. And September 17th, 18th right around there will mark the end of a one-year deadline set by the UN General Assembly for Israel to comply with their demands and those of the World Court or face so-called further measures. That means the time to act is now. This can be done, and we have to at least try. Thanks, Usman.